Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a cloud solutions architect specializing in management technologies. Today's discussion will be a real deep dive into the sync process in Intune, right? As I get started on this, let me just say up front that this session is going to be tailored to Windows. A lot of the concepts in this session, particularly whenever you hear me talk about MDM, will be focused on all the platforms that we manage, iOS, Android, Mac, whatever, right? But specifically, I'm going to go into detail on the sync process for Windows. Also, let me say up front that as I go into this, as of today, this is true, but there could be some changes afoot to kind of shift some things around and make some enhancements and so on. And so the information here largely will continue to be true for as far as I know. But at some point, it could shift like anything, in software. So we'll just get that out of the way. And also, this discussion, the reason I put this together is because when I talk to customers, sometimes I hear them talk about, sync and, this or that or the other related to sync. And it's a reasonable thing to talk about, right? Because the sync process is how the managed device is able to get configurations down from Intune. And so you need that sync process to be able to work. But a sync, a sync is not just a sync, is not just a sync. There are some details here that it's good if we understand so that we really understand what we're talking about. And as we're using Intune, so we really understand where some of the information might be coming from and we're not wasting effort doing the wrong thing. Anyway, that said, let's just jump in. So here's the agenda we're going to use. What is the sync? Why do we care? We're going to talk through the sync, right? And I probably am not going to go. So this is going to be a little bit different session for me because usually I will get onto computers and kind of walk through things and show you some of the detail. Here, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to stay primarily or all in PowerPoint. There also, well, I'll save the rest to the end. Okay, so let's just dive right in. What is a sync? Well, put simply, a sync is a device checking in with Intune to see if it has configurations that it needs to pull down, right? There are multiple kinds of syncs, and right now I should probably be specific, right? You'll see this more in a minute. I'm talking about in this context where there are multiple kinds of syncs, specifically MDM. It's not clear from this slide, so I wanted to make sure I said that. When I say routine and initiated by, I mean, and even the chart below, I am referring to the MDM sync process, right? More on that in a minute, but let's just stay with that for now. So they can be routine syncs, meaning that they just happen and nobody has to do anything about it. And I'll just call your attention here from routine down to this, right? And I'll just talk about this chart for a minute. Routine syncs happen every 8-ish hours, right? Now, that is assuming that nothing else causes a synchronization to take place, right? There are things that will cause a synchronization to take place. This is immediately post-enrollment, right? Different platforms will have different sync schedules for the first period of time after they're enrolled to make sure that any configurations pending for those devices come down right away. Again, referring to MDM. Those happen without you doing anything, right? There are ways where you can intervene, where you can initiate a sync, right? So for there's 4 kind of broad ways and a couple of others that you could probably do as well, including some programmatic options, whatever. We'll stick with these, for now. User. When a user initiates a sync, that is typically done through either if it's a standard user, they're just going to go into the Settings app, or they're going to go into the company portal on their Windows device, and they're going to select to sync. Now, it doesn't matter whether you go into the Settings app, or you go into the company portal, and you sync from there. It's the same sync. Another thing I should say here, and I'll say it a couple of times probably, is in every case for MDM, a sync is initiated from the device. It doesn't matter, let me say it a different way. In every case for MDM, sync happens from the device to Intune. It does not matter the mechanism by which the sync is initiated. The sync always happens from the device to Intune, right? So multiple types of ways that you can get a sync initiated. One is the user goes into the Settings app and they click sync. You'll see that again in a minute. Another is scheduled. So scheduled could refer to what I've described below, right? And so initiating by that scheduled, absolutely, but also inferred, or what could be included in scheduled, is if there were something that you were doing on a schedule that would cause things to happen, on its own schedule, right? Or a schedule you prefer. Right? So in that sense, I'm talking about maybe a programmatic option or a scheduled task kind of option. Don't really want to dig into the details there. But there are ways that you could actually do the sync on a schedule if you need to in a limited basis for a limited period of time. Right? That's also one thing that could be included under the umbrella scheduled. Intune Administrator could initiate this thing. So in this case, and you'll see this again in a second, if the Intune Administrator goes into the portal and triggers the sync, then in that case, that would be initiated, right? The sync would be initiated. Remember, all syncs for MDM originate from the device. Now, they can be triggered external to the device, right, as we've already inferred. You can trigger them programmatically. You can trigger them programmatically directly on the device. You can trigger them programmatically directly through the Intune Graph API commands, whatever, right? And so also, let me peel this back a little bit. You'll see it again in a minute. If the Intune Administrator initiates a sync, they're going to be doing it through the console or programmatically through the Graph API. In that case, the sync request has to be communicated down to the managed device so that the managed device knows sync now. Because again, everything is initiated from the managed device. The way that happens is by using the fourth object, notification channels, right? In this case, specifically, Windows notification channels. And so with all of that said, I'm going to put a bookmark here. We're going to dig into each one of these here in a minute, but just to make sure that we talked about it, and all of this in this context so far is MDM, right? Okay, so why do we care about a sync? Well, that hopefully is pretty obvious, right? Because this sync process is how we retrieve communications or configuration, from Intune that we need to implement on the managed device. We retrieve settings for those various configurations, changes to settings that might be in place that need to be updated, whatever. Basically, your sync process is how your device communicates with Intune to receive and implement and whatever changes that you need, right? So that's important to understand for sure. All right. What are the requirements of sync? Well, there's nothing that's unique or specific to a sync, right? You do have to, of course, have Intune. You need to have a device that's enrolled, all the standard requirements that go along with it. There's nothing else, right? We have to have sync for the device to be managed at all. right? So that's important. All right, so now let's start to peel it back, right? And this is my way of just calling out and highlighting that everything is subject to change as the product team develops and decides to make enhancements, improvements. So this is the detail of how it works today. It may not be, whenever you watch this video, that it works exactly this way or in the same manner of scope as it works or whatever, right? So just take that for whatever it means to you. But I don't know at this stage of anything that's going to radically change this at all, but just want to point that out. Okay, so this slide is just an illustration. I sat down with some folks and we were having lunch, and then the idea of how the sync process works came up. And I didn't have a whiteboard or any way to really illustrate, so we used the items that were on the table to kind of create a flow, so to speak. So I'm just putting this in kind of to be funny, I suppose. And but to illustrate, right? This is a very valid, kind of flow. But I'm not going to go through this at this diagram. I'm going to use some more appropriate diagrams as we go through, right? So talking about how it works. So this is the way we often think in conversation about sync. We will just simply say, I initiated an Intune sync and I'm waiting on that sync to take place, or however we would word it, right? And so this is what we're thinking about, is we have a managed device, and that managed device will synchronize with Intune. So we kind of probably think that the device is the one causing the sync. If we don't, then we've already established the device always is the one that initiates the sync, and that there will be communication between the device and Intune. Settings will come down, and we're all good and happy, right? And that's absolutely true. But there is a lot more to the process, right? That's why I put sync ? Yeah, but there's a lot of detail behind this that if we understand it, it will help us hone what we're doing and what our expectations are based on what we're doing. Because I will tell you that in some cases, your expectations might be one thing, but what's actually happening is a totally different thing, right? So, and you'll see that as we go along. All right, so let's start to detail. When we talk about sync, it's easy to say, but there are four, again, talking about Windows devices, 4 different components on a Windows device that are involved in sync, depending on what you're doing, right? So MDM, which is what we talked about in the very beginning slide, right? MDM is the huge majority of where your different configurations will come down, configuration settings, compliance settings, a large portion of your software deployments will come down through MDM, and a bunch of other things, right? MDM is the thing that we think about when it comes to sync, right? And so when we say we've synchronized or we're triggering a sync, that is all in the context of MDM typically, right? Now, the other types of syncs would include Intune Management Extension. So that is one that we don't think about, but it's second in line in terms of having the most configurations that go through it, right? So specifically, if you're running an install of a Win32 app, it is not installing through MDM, or the configuration is not showing up to the device through MDM. It is going through the Intune Management Extension. If you're running a PowerShell script, that configuration gets down to the device through the Intune Management Extension. Certain parts of device query, right? Proactive remediations, other things run through Intune Management Extension. So understanding what runs where will help you know what to expect and how to do things. So to be specific, if you take and deploy a Win32 app to your devices and then you go to the device and click sync, through settings or through the company portal thinking that will help me get the Win32 app down more quickly. No, it doesn't, right? Because the IME runs completely separate processes from MDM, right? We'll detail that. We'll see that, right? Then next in line, a small percentage of things today is a component called MMPC, stands for Microsoft Management Platform-Cloud. And that's where you will see certain things run through. The first one that I know of that went through MMPC is Endpoint Privilege Management configurations. There are others, so Enhanced Inventory now will partially get configured through the MMPC module and different things. So here, right up until now, you have the ability to trigger a manual sync with MDM or to intervene and cause a sync to happen outside of normal scheduled stuff with MDM. You also have that ability with IME. With MMPC, there's nothing you can do to make it run faster. And the good news is it just is a real, very quick mechanism for getting configuration changes down there. You have to have it be that quick for components like Endpoint Privilege Management to work. And so you don't need to do anything to manually sync it. It just does its thing, right? And then I add the fourth one only for complete discussion, right? And I put in app protection policy. Now this, I mentioned this is a Windows discussion. Here's the one diversion. App protection policy is for iOS and Android. It does have its own sync mechanism, right? It's using what are called enlightened apps. I'll talk about it in just a very quick thumbnail here in a minute. But I did want to at least mention that for completeness. So for a Windows device, really there's three and kind of another that's kind of embedded here with MMPC. But really three big umbrellas, if you will, of the ways that we can do sync. Okay, so about to get into the details of how sync works for each of the different types, right? But before we do, and I'll just disclaim this by saying, this is my thought. There's nothing that I really have to know the future proof positive at all. It's just reading the tea leaves and kind of having lived with the product for as long as I have. I would not be surprised. In fact, we're already kind of seeing it, to see Microsoft Management Platform-Cloud, MMPC, become a component that is more and more important in communicating configurations down to the device and so forth, right? I mentioned Endpoint Privilege Management. It also plays a role now in Enhanced Inventory. And so I kind of expect that it will take a more prominent role as time goes by. What that time frame is, don't know. Totally up to the product group if that happens, but just kind of speculating. So if my speculation is wrong, then I've put the appropriate disclaimers out there. Okay, so turning to the MDM portion, right, and digging into that about how that works. So we kind of split it out into the different kinds of ways that the MDM sync can take place. There's the routine sync, which will happen every 8 hours-ish on schedule, right? Assuming the machine stays on. Now, if the machine's powered off, obviously it can't sync on an 8-hour time frame. It'll resume that and kind of the counter will start over once it turns back on and it's able to synchronize and such. But given all things being equal, the machine stays powered on, expect to sync every 8-ish hours from that device. I call this kind of the fail-safe sync. Just in case nothing else has triggered it to synchronize, check in, the machine will check in, right? Okay. Then we have the manual sync. So this is where the user might go into Settings app and go into Accounts and then Access Worker School and drill down and find the sync button. And then they can press that sync button and the device will initiate a sync. Again, all syncs happen from the device to Intune. There's also the company portal, and the company portal has an option to initiate a sync as well. So whichever way they do it, that would be considered a manual sync. And you can do that whenever you want to. Right now, if you sit there and press sync over and over and over again, every second for 2 minutes, does that mean that a sync will happen that frequently? No. There's got to be some protections built in so that we don't just overwhelm the back end with sync requests, and there are, right? So I would strongly urge, please don't go in and just hit sync over and over and over and over again. That's just going to end up cascading a bunch of things, and it really won't achieve the results that you're trying to achieve by pressing sync that often, right? Okay, so that's manual. Now, there's also this concept of Windows Notification Service. Let's talk about that for just a minute. So WNS is Windows Notification Service. Windows Notification Service, WNS, is a Windows component. It is not an Intune component, but it absolutely is part of Windows. It's used by, but not isolated to, Intune. There are other things that will use the Windows Notification Service. So what the Windows Notification Service is, PCs will maintain a connection to our Windows Notification Service servers in our data center so that we can basically send quick notifications to those managed machines, or to those not managed, to those machines, to let them know of certain things, right? Maybe tell the user that there's a Windows update waiting for them, right? Or other things. In the Intune world, remember I mentioned that every sync is initiated from the managed device. So if the Intune administrator, let's go forward in the PowerPoint here. Here's a little bit of a diagram I pulled out of the documentation just showing the components and how they all loop together. You can look at that. I'm going to move forward to what I put together, which I like better for this discussion. If the Intune administrator goes into the portal and selects sync, then what has to happen is the notification to initiate a sync has to be communicated to the managed device. So what happens is Intune, knowing that it's a Windows device, will transmit this sync request through to the Windows notification servers. There's a persistent connection from the devices to the Windows notification server, so it'll just pass the notification down to the device to say, you need to check in now, right? Happens very, very quickly. And so the device will get that, and the result is effectively the sync button will be pressed on the device. It will be done programmatically, but that's the net of it. That's why I say all syncs are initiated from the managed device, right? So if this, if the Windows notification service process is broken somehow, then you're not ever going to be able to transmit the sync. That's why when administrators do something in the Intune portal, that they expect to trigger a sync on the managed devices. Now, that could be pressing the sync button here as I show. That could also be taking certain configurations that are required and sending them out, right? Then if you don't have a healthy Windows notification service connection, that will never make it down. And so the only other sync that you have to rely on are those that are initiated manually or those that are initiated on the routine schedule, right? So the syncs will continue happening, but they might be delayed, right? Now, let me dig into this a little bit more. So I mentioned that the 8-hour sync is what I call a fail-safe sync, because if you have a configuration that is going out to the environment as required, the sync should happen much quicker, right? Because let's just use this example. If I have a configuration that I've set as required to a group of 10 devices, then as soon as Intune sees that that is required to those 10 devices, Intune will notify Windows Notification Service that these 10 devices have had a configuration change that they need to check in and see what it is. And so Windows Notification Service will tell the devices, check in now, and the device will come back and check in with Intune, get the configuration change, implement it. And that's why, especially if you're working in your lab and you do an Intune config that's required, you will see that happen very quickly on the device. You're not waiting for an 8-hour sync to happen because Windows Notification Service does it for you much quicker. Right now, if that Windows notification channel, again, is busted, then it's not going to be able to do it that quickly, and you will see some latency even just as a result of that, right? So making sure the Windows Notification Service channels are healthy, really, really important. I'll show you some tips on that in a minute, right? The other thing, there is a scale limit to how broadly we will be able to do this, right? So there are some very, very, very large customers that use Intune, right? And so just imagine the load on Windows Notification Service and Intune and so forth. Even though a notification is tiny, right? The check-in from devices also is maybe tiny, but it might result in some activity that's not tiny. So if we were to allow every single device in a tenant with hundreds of thousands of devices or more, there's a point at which scale would be challenged, right? Now, what that scale number is, I don't know. I've asked. It's really not a totally fully baked in number. There's many factors that attribute or that go along with it. But just know that, right? So typically speaking, whenever you put out configs, they're not going to go to hundreds of thousands of devices or more. They might, but it would be rare. You're probably talking more 1,000, tens of thousands of devices, something like that, right? Okay, hope that makes sense. So let's keep rolling. Now, changing from MDM to Intune Management Extension. I mentioned Intune Management Extension, completely different structure than what we talk about with MDM, where we have the 8-ish hour sync and we have the ability to press sync in the console and have it take action. Nope, what I show here is that if you go into the Intune console as an admin and press sync, that has absolutely no impact on Intune Management Extension, right? Doesn't do anything at all. So if you're deploying something that runs through Intune Management Extension, like a PowerShell script or a Win32 app or something like that, and you go press sync in the Intune portal, or you even go into settings and press sync there, or go into the company portal and sync there, right? None of that matters. Intune Management Extension is its own process. So if still we'll have the device down here. It will sync with Intune. And the way it syncs is on an hourly schedule, right? So you can intervene and cause it to happen more quickly, right? But expect every hour, very much like Config Manager, right? It will synchronize in, IME will, with Intune. Now, there is a registry key for Intune Management Extension that contains some interesting information. You can see policies that come down or applications that come down. A good amount of information. I'm not going to dig into this here, but it's there if you want to look at it. Also, Intune Management Extension exists as a service on your devices. So if you look at services and go down to Microsoft Intune Management Extension, you will see it there, should be running. If it's not, then that's a problem, right? Because then the configs that come down through IME won't show up. But I've never seen a situation where the service isn't running. I have seen it where it's not there, but it's been a long time since I've seen that. It should just be installed as part of being enrolled in Intune, right? It is possible to do a manual IME sync. So basically all you need to do is restart that service and the sync will take place. That's a good tip to know if you're doing lab testing and you want to get a config to come down right away, you don't want to wait on it, whatever, just restart this service and you're good to go, right? Yeah, restarting the computer would do it too, but that's a bit overkill, right? Now, doing that at scale to restart the service generally shouldn't be necessary at all, but it is possible, right? All right, MMPC. So this slide will just simply show that there's direct communication between the managed device and Intune. There is no way that I've found to trigger any kind of manual activity with MMPC, right? It's designed differently. Let's just leave it at that, right? So that's all I'll say about MMPC. Okay, last thing, and this does not apply to Windows, but just for completeness, right? There is this concept called a enlightened app, something that you can take and apply app protection policies to, not app configuration policies. That you can do that, but I'm not talking about app configuration policies. I'm specifically talking about app protection policies applied to iOS or apps running on iOS or Android devices, right? So these enlightened apps have a layer around them, a management wrapper, so to speak, around the app. And that management wrapper enables certain management capabilities like, disabling copy and paste, or not allowing saving to, iCloud, or whatever, right? There's a number of different things that you can configure for the app experience for users, right? So the whole point, I put it here again for completeness, the sync process for the enlightened app only happens when the enlightened app is running, and then it happens on its own internal schedule based on the wrapper that's around that particular enlightened app. The enlightened apps can be used on devices that are enrolled in Intune or not enrolled at all. And so for those that are not enrolled, having that management layer around the app makes sense, because there's no other way to get the management configurations to it if the app itself is not engineered for it, right? Anyway, that's all I'll say about that. I have sessions on app protection policies if you want to know in more detail, but I add it only for completeness. All right, now let's actually look at some of this. So some of this is probably redundant because I've already shown it to you, but let me pull in a managed device. Here's one of my Intune devices. All right, and I mentioned going to settings, so let's just navigate there. So I'm going to go under settings, and then accounts, and then access worker school here. And then here, I can click down and hit info. Here's my sync button. So I just press that and the sync process happens. And for some reason, I think it's networking in my case. Sorry, that's my bad for networking. But that would initiate my sync. I know what that is. I have a hotspot I'm using right now, and I needed to make a configuration change in Hyper-V, but you get the idea anyway, right? Now, you could also, as I mentioned, use the company portal. So I'm just going to use my corporate machine. I'm going to pause the video for just a second. Okay, I just wanted to make sure there wasn't anything on the screen that shouldn't be. So I'm going to click on Settings, and then I can sync from here. Same thing, right? No difference really at all there. And you can do the same through iOS and Android, the company portal on iOS and Android as well. Let me pop back into the Intune portal. So on my managed device, I have one here. I can just go up and let me look at my device here to pick one, whatever. I have my sync option in the console. So that's what I've talked about, right? Again, kind of redundant. We've talked about it no issue. Okay. Now, I mentioned Windows Notification Service. So let me show you some details about that. Let me go back to my Intune machine, managed machine. And I want to show you this. So what I'm going to show you this more for awareness, where it is, how it connects, all this different information. Close this up. All right, good. So that's for another session that I'm working on. So specifically, as an Intune admin, what I would want to know, knowing the importance of the Windows Notification Service connection, I would want to know that my devices are connected and that is healthy. And if I'm getting any errors, right, that might come and go, be transient, whatever. So to find that out, I'm going to navigate to Local Machine Software Microsoft Enrollments with an S right here, right? And now this probably is just me, but I've never really found a good way to know which GUID I care about. So I need to just go and expand these keys as I go along and find the one I'm interested in. Okay, so it shouldn't take me too long. Let's just go find it. There. So I'm looking for push, right? That is an indicator that you are on the key that has Windows notification settings configured. Now, don't change this. Please don't change this. But what you're going to look at under push is, information such as the URI that's used, the status, right? Is it 0, meaning no errors? Retry counts, what's going on there, right? Any of last renewal time, because this URI will get renewed fairly regularly. So this is going to give you a real good indication whether Windows notification is healthy on your managed device, right? There's some other information here too that's not directly related to WNS, but still, that gives you some good info, I hope, right, to understand where you can check status and so forth. All right. Now, starting to wrap up, right? Again, didn't spend a lot of time in demo, most of the time in PowerPoint, just trying to explain some concepts. So wrapping up, right? So one of the things that you could do if you wanted to, there's a tool called SyncML. It's not a tool that you need, generally speaking, but if you really want to see the communication in the raw form of what happens whenever a sync is initiated on a device, then you can absolutely use SyncML to watch it. In fact, in one of the sessions, the enhanced inventory that I'm working on doing, I reference SyncML there and show you kind of a blob of data and what it means. And again, I'm not telling you to go out and get it or to use it. I'm just telling you, if you want to see at the nitty-gritty level, you can actually use tools like SyncML, Procmon, whatever, to help see what's going on, right? On the tips and tricks side, right? So, Windows notification, we talked about what that does. Well, one question that's come up sometimes is, well, what if the device that I'm trying to get this configuration to is offline at the time the notification goes down? Well, if that's the case, Windows Notification Service will try 4 times to notify the device. If it can't do it in 4 times, then it's just going to rely on the normal sync to be able to get that configuration down, right? So that's the way that works, and shouldn't be a big deal, because if the device is off for a period of time anyway, the next time it powers on, another sync should be very close to happening or immediately happen based on the time, right? There's one more thing I was going to add. I think I'll bypass it. That's really it, right? The goal of this was really to help really shed some light on the sync process for Windows devices. Hopefully that was accomplished. We will leave it there and talk to you next time.